Welcome to the Learning Experience powered by CAST. I'm one of your hosts, Kelly Suding.
And I'm Luis Perez.
And I'm Brian Dean.
We are three educators here ready to break down barriers until learning has no limits. Let's do this. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Learning Experience podcast with myself and my colleagues and friends, Louise and Brian. How's it going, friends?
It's going pretty well. Looking forward to, summer, and we're starting to think about summer conferences. And I think there's a big one in DC that we might mention today, right? There's a little event happening that brings together the UDL community. So, Brian, are you excited about that?
Oh, like a Comic-Con, like a comic convention? Because I've been to a couple of those.
Kind of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There'll be a bunch of characters there for sure.
I am sure there will be. Yeah, I'm sure there will be. Yes, I am so stoked for our upcoming UDL-Con in July. It is a lot of work to plan, and it has been beautiful to be part of that planning. And I am just so excited to see our friends in our community. I often say that UDL-Con is like summer camp, right? It's like old school summer camp where you show up and you got friends that you've known forever. And then there's some new people walking around and they have no idea what's going on. And you take them to arts and crafts and we all sit around the fire at night and go canoeing. It's the best.
Yeah, who wouldn't want to be there? So that makes me think about just professional learning or professional development, because it is conference time. So just reflecting, do you remember one of your favorite presentations you've ever been in? You don't have to say names, and maybe why?
I would say one of my ISTE presentations. I think it was the first time. ISTE is the International Society for Technology and Education. Mm-hmm. And my first time there, the reason why this presentation is memorable is because the previous night, it was my first time at a conference as a graduate student. And I had a little bit too much fun. So that made the presentation, the next day was really interesting. But I think, you just have to get out there, do that first presentation, get the butterflies out of the way. And then I've been presenting ever since. So that first one, you never forget that first time that you were out in public and you're unsure of yourself. But actually, my favorite presentation was one where David Rose was in the audience. Mm-hmm. David Rose, one of the founders of CAS and the godfather of UDL.
No pressure.
But the beautiful thing is that because he was sitting off to the side and I have no peripheral vision, I didn't know he was in the audience until he came up and introduced himself, and the previous hour flashed before my eyes. And I was like, what did I say today? I mean, David Rose is in the audience. But anyway, I ended up at CAS, so I'm guessing that I didn't say anything that was too far off base, right? How about you, Brian?
Yeah. I think one of my favorite presentations that I've ever been a part of was I got to present with my son and daughter. And that was they were young, and I was doing some paper prototyping around how would you build video games around social constructs, right? And how do we use that as planning with a bunch of teachers? And so my kids were kind of the beta testers, and they were giving advice, and they were young. They were, I think my son was 12, and my daughter was 8. It was dope. It was so much fun. What about you, Kelly?
So I'm going to tell you about a session that I experienced. So it wasn't me presenting. So it was years ago at ATIA, which is an International Assistive Technology Conference that's always down in Florida. And I remember, and it was my first big conference. And I remember, I don't even know how long, maybe 15 years. I don't know. I can't remember. Anyway, so I went in, I was just super excited to, be at this conference. And I remember I picked a session that I wanted to go to, and I walked to the door, and it was standing room only. And I was like, what's this about? And it was a session on learning disabilities, specifically dyslexia and assistive technology. So I was standing at the door. I'm like, I still really want this topic. So I went in there, and the presenter, there was a huge room, and the presenter was so engaging and leaned into all the attendees, was hilarious and brilliant. And that first session that I went into changed how I became an educator, because I learned so much from that one presenter. And what's even more exciting about that experience for me is she's in our studio today. The one and only Carol Allen is here. And it is like a full circle moment. So with that said, Carol, welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Yay!
That's a really nice thing to say, Kelly. That's not what you normally say about me.
Well, we're being recorded, so you know.
All right, okay, I'll pay you later.
You know, Kelly, you were setting us up because I thought you were going to say, and this guy Luis was giving this presentation, but
Right, thought she was
no,
going
I'm
to say the
just
same
kidding.
thing. I thought she was going to say, and then like she
No.
hooked us. She was like, "What's the best presentation?" We talk about presentations we've done, like we're so full of ourselves, and then she's like, "Here's the one that changed my life. It's amazing, so like super nice." And then she brings on Carol Allen. Like, I feel like I was totally set up. You kidding me?
Hey, lads, I win.
Yeah.
Right, Carol wins. Well, I do have to say, Carol is not only a brilliant educator, she's also one of our keynotes at UDL-Con this summer. And we have to get a shout out, Luis Perez.
Oh, yeah.
He's another keynote. So look, Brian, we are like filled with like greatness.
We're deep in it.
Let's get started. Learning more about Carol and your journey. Carol, could you share a little bit about your journey and like what brought you into the field of education, how you were impacting so many people all over the world? What led you to focus on your career, thinking about universal design for learning and accessibility to support every single learner?
Yeah, you know, it's weird you saying impact and it's very weird what you've just said about me because I never feel. We have a phrase in the north of England, and that is being a sand dancer, a dancer on sand. And a friend of mine who I work with quite frequently, we said, you know, sometimes we feel like I live near a beach and a big sand, and we sometimes feel like we create things or we attempt to create important things in the sand, but the tide comes in, just washes it away, and you're a sand dancer, it's gone. And so it's very rare that you actually hear things like that you just said about impacting on somebody because you don't know. You just don't know whether your words or your experience reach them. Whereas if you're working actually directly with a family or with children, you can see the change. And I'm just as happy about that. Where did it bring me? Well, education, all I ever want to do is teach. Now, you three are all youngsters. I could be your mums. But all I ever wanted to do was be a teacher. I didn't even countenance another career. I loved school. I loved watching teachers, watching what they did well, what they didn't do well, and presumably learning from it to some extent. Other people played doctors, nurses, you know, pilots, bus drivers, farms. I played school. I had a little school in my mum and dad's garage, and I made the neighborhood kids come in. I made books. I taught them lessons. I taught them to read. I was very strict. I set homework. So it's all I have ever wanted to do. And I went into education, and we could kind of go through all the phases. Suffice to say, I became a teacher and thoroughly enjoy, still to this day, teaching. Still, even though I'm an old bag and supposed to be retired, I still have tame head teachers who will lend me classes or lend me groups that I can work with, because I don't think you should ever stand up and show or suggest to other people how to do something unless you've done it yourself. So how does universal design for learning fit in that? Well, it's just words. When you're as old as I am, you hear all these phrases come in and people go, oh, this is a new thing. This is a new thing. And it's not. You know, we had the phrase holistic education. There's so many phrases and things that have kind of gone round the cycle. I do quite like UDL as being a kind of, it's a more thought out premise than it ever was before. But what really for me has struck from the very, very beginning is that every child can learn, and it's about problem solving and having a can-do attitude. Instead of letting barriers be constructed, artificial barriers in some cases, you know, we have to, as educators, we have to look and say, you know, what can I do to move this child from the point they're at now to the next point on their learning journey? And that's a fascinating thing. That's a joy to do that. So wherever you are in the world, to me, if you're in education, if you're in teaching, you've just got the best job.
I mean, is that the mic drop right there? Do we need any more? Like
right?
there are so many things you said in that, Carol, that just resonated with me so deeply. And first of all, your authenticity comes through. Like you're a believer. You're a true believer. This is something that is your work. Like it is the work that you need to do, that you've been called to do. And that just comes through. But more importantly, I love how you talk about UDL and then you say, well, it's some more words, but then it develops into a framework. I really, really love and share that same view, right? Like UDL is when people say things like, well, that just seems like it's good teaching. I'm always like, yeah, it is good teaching. Why else would we do it if it's not good teaching? And
Yeah.
moreover, it's good teaching with intentionality, right? Like I'm not just stumbling upon this. I'm really thinking about my craft of teaching and my science of learning, right? And I'm putting those things together and I'm really working with those. And like that's what it seems like you're capturing. I just have to give a shout out and call that out because I think that what you say is very refreshing, even though we've heard it. It's always nice to hear it again and again and again. That
Yeah.
like this is intentionality, and there's something that is powerful in what we do and how we like working with individuals to learn, no matter where they sit. Right, is just this incredibly. I don't know. It's a calling, and that comes through. And so I just wanted to say I appreciate that. But I do have a follow-up question. I do, because your work really centers around students with disabilities and there's a lot of misconceptions that come up from teachers, right? And there's a lot that's being asked of teachers all over the world, no matter if they're based in the United States or they're based in England or they're, the UK or they're based in, Africa, wherever they may be, right? There's a lot of demands that are on teachers. And because of that, I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions that happen around what is needed for specially designed instruction and what is needed for students with disabilities. So how do you think, like, if you were to give me the thumbnail, Carol, just the thumbnail, like, how does UDL, in your view, help teachers and educators with supporting those students, supporting all students in general, but supporting students also within our disability communities?
Yeah, well, that your final sentence there is the important one.
Mm,
It's UDL supports everybody, supports the staff, supports the parents and families, supports the school system, the children, all of the children. And yeah, my work does often centre on students with disabilities, but the premise of UDL is for everyone. It isn't just for the child who needs special accommodations. What are some of the things that it helps with specifically? I think, and this isn't new, you guys will all have met this, there continues to be a lack of aspiration for youngsters who've got identified needs.
yes.
And this often comes as part of labelling. Parents and professionals push for a label. They want a label, and I understand why, because it often releases funding, particularly here in
Hmm.
the UK. It also kind of identifies that the parents aren't just going loopy. There is a genuine reason why their child is
Yeah.
struggling with certain things.
Mm,
However, with those labels often comes judgment, and that judgment categorizes students, and we forget that actually everybody's an individual on their own learning journey. And then the next problem that educators have is that when you kind of challenge them or gently kind of try and show them way forward, they think, oh, it's going to be too difficult, it's going to be too much
right.
work. But
Right.
both of those phrases, if you like, evolve from the fact they're scared, they feel inadequate, and they're not sure what to do. And that's where I feel UDL should step in. Now that we've kind of got more words and we've got this framework in its first state, it's evolving. And I expect this to be something which continues and evolves more things. We need that practicality and that support and routes for help, both for the families, for the students themselves, because of course, Kelly knows I'm a firm believer in empowering the students to advocate for themselves
Yes.
as early
Yes.
an age as possible. But also the educators themselves. It is very hard. I've just come back from visiting classrooms in another area of the United States, And obviously, it's the end of your academic year. The teachers are tired. They're doing the best job they can, but there's all the pressures. And this isn't just America. This is in UK. This is everywhere. There's so much pressure on education and teachers and schools and the institution and the syllabus. And there's so much external pressure put on our jobs that sometimes they just need help. And I think UDL, as it evolves, can be one of the key places for them to get that.
Wow. Yeah. There is nothing in that statement either that I cannot just. I almost stood up and said, say it louder for the folks in the back. I mean, like every statement there is another banger, Carol. You're absolutely right. Right. Like that is the point of UDL. UDL is not just for students. Like it helps us as educators, and it helps relieve some of that design. That's this complexity and this layer that we don't often address in UDL. Because we're student focused and we're human, but ultimately, as I've said all the time, UDL is human centered. So that means it affects everyone. I mean, you just nailed it on the head.
And Carol, something that you said that really connected with me is the idea of labels. Because I was lucky that I was not diagnosed with a disability until late in life. So I didn't get the memo that, you should have low expectations of your life, which meant that I went out and did things like try to play baseball as a person with a visual impairment, and try to do things that nobody said you can't do those things. But I think labels can also be really powerful because, it depends on who's doing the labeling and why they're doing it. So for me, I think labeling is also a way that you find community. So when I was giving a label, I was able to find other people that had visual impairments, and I found power in that. And I found, a community that I could not only self-advocate, but advocate together, which is more important than ever for us to stick together and advocate with each other, right?
I agree with you about the positivity of labeling. I didn't kind of cover that. You find your tribe, and it gives you strength and power. I hope I was clear that it was the labeling that defines for those who don't understand limits, and then they say, well, they can't do that because
Which brings me to my question. I think you're potentially our first UK presenter or host or guest on the podcast. So I'm interested in sort of getting an international perspective here from you. What are you, because you just said you just were in the United States. What do you see as some of the things that we kind of share around the world when it comes to the education of students with disabilities? And what are some of the things that are a little bit different from our environment to yours so that people get a flavor of the international perspective? And then maybe you can share a story of something, from your time out in the field.
Right. So across the world, well, I've been very lucky because I've done a lot of work in Scandinavia, in Australia, in Singapore, obviously the UK and in the US, and also Albania. I went to do some work in Albania, which was, if we're talking about life-affirming and life-changing moments, that's one of them. So, do you know what? Things that really make you think. So I'm going to give you two things. One very simple, small thing, and one kind of bigger moment. And the bigger moment was in Albania, where the work I was doing with a colleague, we were looking at a situation where children with disabilities at that point in time was very rare that they stayed with their families. They were taken into the orphanage system. And I'm using the word orphanage in the kindest way, because in the morning we were training 2 teachers to work with a range of disabilities. And then in the afternoon, we went up and we actually worked in the institutions themselves. And, that's part of a longer and a bigger discussion. However, 1 or 2 families with the internet were beginning to see that in other countries, children with disabilities weren't locked away. weren't taken away from their families. And there was a little girl with cerebral palsy, and we were working in freezing conditions. And she had so many layers of clothes on, that she could hardly move her arms at all. And the colleague I was working with was superb at switching skills. So we set up simple switches for her, and we taught her how to kind of very simple word processing in a thing. Anyway, 6 months after I'd been out there, I was contacted again by the people we'd worked for, and she'd been writing poetry. And and they said, "Oh, you must see this. The poetry is really, really good." So to cut a long story short, because this is only an hour's podcast, isn't it? I asked for them to translate the poems into English and to send me both the Albanian and the English, and some photographs of the family and her herself. And I paid for 50 copies to be self-published. And I sent 20 copies back to Albania, and I sold 30 copies for a minimal amount of money just to cover the cost of the printing. And what I got back was phenomenal, because this family were able to say, my daughter is a published author. My daughter, here she is. This is a book that she has written. She's done this, which was absolutely unheard of. And the people that bought the books, or I gave some as gifts, they absolutely treasure them, because obviously it's a limited edition as well. And that was a moment where I thought, literacy is for everybody. Accessible tech is for everybody, and we absolutely can change lives. And that was a huge one. But on a much smaller scale, but in the same way, in the UK a few years ago, before COVID, but just before, I met a boy who was 7. All right. He was 7 years old, and he was severely dyslexic. He hadn't been diagnosed yet. We won't go into the pros and cons of whether he should have been, but he wasn't. I'm not allowed to diagnose, but obviously, when you do what we all do, you can tell the lad was severely dyslexic. And I had one of the scanning pens, one of the C pens, and I had it in my bag, and I got it out and I showed him how to use it. And he caught on very quickly, because he's very bright, and he was scanning phrases in his book and in his reading book. And then and we were sitting working in a little library offshoot from his classroom. He said, well, does it work on any book? I said, well, test it out. And he went and grabbed a book at random. It works, Carol, it works. And then he said, well, does it work on posters and things on the wall? I said, give it a go. He gave it a go. He said, it works. And I said, and not only that, I said, on your computer, we can have anything read out to you. And he said, no. And so I showed, now bearing in mind, we're only talking a few years ago. This is not new technology. And he did that, and he turned round, and I won't use the expletive. I'll do the blank. He says, he looked at me really strangely. And he said, are you blanking magic? And I said, what? And he said, are you a witch? And I said, no, why are you saying that? And he said, why have I got this far in my school career and nobody's shown me this? Mm-hmm. And it just goes to show it can be the small things that we already have, but it's about seeking out the places and the students who haven't been shown the simple things. You don't have to do big, clever things. And I guess what I'm saying is those two stories should show you that it's always problem solving. It's always getting to the young person, finding out what they need. And, 9 times out of 10, we already have the answer.
That's right.
I love those stories. I mean, they're so powerful. And it really speaks to the belief in belief, right? Believing in people. And I can see that in your work, throughout your work, Carol, that you believe in people. And both of those stories illustrate that, right? You believe that this child in Albania could publish poetry and could have a voice. And you believe that this child in the UK, with just the proper tools. And as you say, it is kind of magic. I've always said that when we give people the tools that they need to do their best work, it's a magical moment. right?
Yeah.
In an
Yeah.
instant. I mean, I saw that in my own life. The first time I was exposed to a screen reader, and
Yeah.
it wasn't the screen reader. It was the message of hope, right? But
That's
like
exactly it.
you can do this. You have the tools. It's like climbing a mountain, and all of a sudden you have the tools that you need to
Yeah.
do the climb. So I really appreciate that. And folks, if you want to hear more powerful stories, you gotta come to UDL-Con. I'm
Right.
just gonna put it out there because you're
That's
gonna
right.
hear some more powerful stories from Carol. So
I have to be honest. I am still a little stunned. This whole podcast has been just absolutely amazing for me, Carol. I really just can't thank you enough. I want to say that ahead of time. And yes, if you want to hear more, definitely join us at UDL-Con, where you'll hear not only Carol's stories, but everybody else's stories. That's July 22nd and July 23rd in DC, in the United States. It's gonna be a great time. But the biggest thing about UDL-Con that has always been central for me is this idea of community and this idea of stories, and not just how UDL builds community, and builds belongingness and fosters belongingness and helps us find, as you said, Carol, our tribe for students, but helps educators too, because it's easy to become that isolated educator, right? That educator, or feel like you're that educator on an island, that you're doing this thing that nobody's really understanding why, and you yourself aren't exactly clear, but you know that it's working. So I'm curious how and where you see communities popping up. Does UDL help foster that? And also, we're coming up on UDL-Con. I'm looking forward to hanging out in person with you. But what are you hoping for community-wise when we all get together in DC on July 22nd, 23rd?
I've already outlined that I think UDL has to evolve and has to develop. Not because it's not good now, it's just that everything changes. And I don't think the impact and the support it can give to educators in particular, I don't think people even think about that now. If you look at the kind of information slides that you can take and use in your own presentations to explain what it is to other people, unless I'm missing them, guys, for which case I apologize, there aren't any about what it offers specifically to the staff. So I think this has to happen. Now, my biggest sadness in the past few years has been the demise of Twitter. Twitter did provide that community. It did have toxicity at times, but there were several kind of groups at certain times during the week that you knew. So, for example, there was a group who would come on at 6:00 every Monday night for an hour. There was another group on a Thursday I never missed for an hour. So there were different times where you could go online and you could just chat for an hour about the real things that were mattering to you. And you could offer to host, couldn't you? And or people set questions. And I often sat up in the early hours of the morning to join some of the American ones, because I found that community so helpful and so challenging and so many ideas. Now, we lost that. And can UDL produce a replicate, a new space for us to have those conversations? Certainly this conference has to be a starting point for the conversations and how we can get together. Because what I'm seeing at the moment is that people are back in their little individual silos,
Right.
and with all the pressures on them in the classroom, we have to look beyond your classroom, your school, your district, your country, because there's so much to learn out there, and we shouldn't have to all do it individually. Collectively, we are stronger. So let me give you another example. Many, many moons ago when I started, I am that old, before the internet, before anything like that, I got a child in my class with a very rare syndrome. And I tried to find out about this syndrome. And we have a bookshop in Oxford, next to Oxford University, which you'll have heard of. Little education we've got here. And I phoned them. because they are known as the educational books. And I said, is there anything on rare syndromes? And they said, well, we'll get back to you, because they're like librarians. They like to research. And they got back to me and they said, there are these 2 books, part 1 and part 2, but you've got to buy both of them. And they cost £35 each. So that's 70 quid for the 2.
Yeah.
Now that's a lot of money. And this is when I was in my early 20s. So we're talking 2 books that are about $250, maybe $400 for the 2. On top of that, I had to send the money ahead of time. Then the money had to get translated because the books came from Australia, I think I'm correct. Then they had to post them to Blackwell's bookshop. Then Blackwell's had to post them to me, and I had to pay all the postage. And it took about 2-3 months for me to get these books. But when I got them, that rare syndrome was in there. And not only that, it told me what 1 or 2 people had started to do with it. It gave me a starting point. So that's all those years ago. Now, of course, I can Google it and I can just put online in a community. Has anyone taught somebody with this? How did you get started? What were the key issues? What are the things I need to get right? And we need that. We need that. That we're talking about tribes, and the educational tribe has strength, but we need to connect and communicate.
Yeah, you bring up this point, and I've always called it egg carton teaching, right? Where eggs come and they look like they're touching, but if you look underneath, they're kind of secluded, right? They're in their little egg pod, which keeps them safe. But there's this false sense of them being connected and open. And I think that we tend to do that in education. We tend to do egg carton teaching where it looks like on the surface, like we've been brought together and we're supposed to build this community, but there's not really, when it comes down to it, there's not really enough facilitation in that or enough different modalities to get into that communication that we end up kind of siloing ourselves, right? Like one of the biggest complaints, no matter what educational agency or group or whatever you belong to, there's always that dreaded word of the silo. Well, a lot of times those are self-imposed because we're busy in our egg carton and we're not breaking that down. And I think that Twitter communities, online communities, those communities of practice that are virtual or networks, are amazing. But there's also something about coming together as people, like together in one space and then building ideas from there.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. I one of the main reasons I've said yes to this conference is the chance to meet people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's,
exactly.
To meet different people, to share ideas, to hear theirs, to learn from them, hopefully to share some stuff the other way. But it's always good. It's a bit like saying, do you want to teach a lesson through Zoom, or do you want to have the children in the room with you? There is no comparison.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I also think it's great that we have communities like Twitter and so on that we can reach out to the world and get advice. But sometimes, how often do we not know what the person in the room next door is doing?
Oh, yeah,
exactly. That's what I mean.
Like down the hall, and they may be doing really powerful stuff, and just by sharing locally sometimes, and by sort of co-teaching, that's a powerful practice. We can start to share these practices and really build capacity together. So I think both are important, right? Being connected locally and being connected to the rest of the world for expertise that maybe we can't get locally. So both have power.
I think a lot of educators are unsure about the brilliance of what they do. So we tend to be, apart from 1 or 2, who say they're brilliant all the time, and they're usually the ones who are not. But and we know who they are. But we're not going to name names, are we, dear? But I might stick it on the bottom of my slide. On each one, I might put a name.
I am trying, Carol, not to be that way. I am trying to learn humility. Thank you for not calling me out personally.
But you know what I'm saying? Mostly you meet a teacher, you go in. I spend a lot of time in other people's classrooms, and I'll say something like, that was brilliant. I never thought of doing that before. And they go, oh, well, I've done it for you. And I'm like, well, would you like to write it up? Would you like to share it? No, nobody'd be interested. And it just, there's people doing brilliant work going unrecognized. So
Yeah.
yes, you're exactly right. I visited a school just before I went to America, a primary school, which is like your elementary school. And the head has got a brilliant CPD thing in that every teacher gets to visit every other class in the school at some point during the year. So they get to see all their colleagues teaching and doing things. And they, and just that simple idea, they transfer skills, they transfer knowledge, they transfer ideas. They have a better idea about, if you teach the older ones, what the little ones are really doing. If you've got the little ones, where we have to get the older ones to. It's a very simple idea and it works.
Yeah. And as you're talking, Carol, I'm thinking this about you. We always say, oh my gosh, Carol Allen is brilliant. And you're like, I've just been doing this for years. So you're a great example of that. And I have to say, your time pretending to be a teacher with the neighborhood kids and or whatever has paid off. I mean, from the start. And so we're really excited to keep that community building. We're going to be in person soon. I cannot just express how elated we all are to have you. You're taking the time to be here with and meeting so many people. So when your keynote, what are you most looking forward to? What are you passionate about? What kind of message are you hoping that people walk away with during your keynote?
Well, that's a wee bit too kind, all that, Kelly, because it is just me. It is just me turning up, the coffee drinking person. Anyway, but do you know, I'd love to tell you a proper answer to that, but you know me well enough, Kelly, to know I haven't written the bugger yet. So I can't I can't say to you exactly what my key messages are going to be, but I did have a little think about it. And one of my favorite phrases is what you've done today good enough for your own children? If you deliver something that wouldn't be what you would want your own children to receive should they be needing help, then how dare you do that for other people's children? It appalls me. And the second, so that might appear, depends how much I rant. As you also know, I'm a bit of a ranter, but I'll try hard not to. So the next one, it would be, don't give up. Because do you know what? Sometimes our job can be so frustrating. We try all different ways and we're not getting through and we're not getting the success, but you never, ever know how close you are to making that happen. And I usually give an example of that. A girl that I taught called Yvonne with Down syndrome, and we got her to read at the age of 16 and a half. Now, her parents were over the moon with me, but it wasn't me that did it. It was all those teachers who came before, who kept trying different things, who kept books alive, who kept literacy alive, who made it something she wanted to do. I was the lucky one who got her at the moment where it all fell into place. So don't give up would be a second one. And the third one, which is one I've had to do all my career, is embrace failure. You know, people have these posters, don't they, on their walls, saying, life is learning to dance in the rain and all that. Embrace failure because if you fail at something, two things come out of it. One, you learn that might work with someone else, but at least you know how to try it. And so don't give up on it. But secondly, you have kind of knocked that counter out the field and you have to look for something else. So I guess if I put all those together, Kelly, I want people to care about what they do.
I love that. You're giving me goosebumps, Carol.
Yeah.
I'm already so excited about this. And I love how you talk about failure, right? I like taking improv classes. And one part of when you're doing improv classes, you celebrate failure big time.
Yeah.
You mess up, you're just like, woo, you cheer and say, good job, you failed, because you're learning from that and you're going to do better next time. And I always wish I could go back in the classroom and do that. Physically get excited when someone fails to kind of take that stigma off that we're oftentimes we're afraid to fail, but we fail forward, right?
Yeah.
We hope that we do. I just have to say this: failure is one of those things that I think that we dress up and we put pretty bows on, but really it's not failure that we're celebrating. It's learning from that failure that we're celebrating, right?
Yes.
Gaining the insight from it, right? So just being well, I screwed up. It's cool. yes, I'm awesome, is a false sense of what failure should be, right? So it's the
Yeah, I
learning
agree.
from, it's the processing, it's those pieces that
Right.
are important. I think that's what we're all saying, but I just feel sometimes we have to call that out, and we just have to say that
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah,
explicitly, is that it's learning
it's the
from.
reflection, right? It's
Hmm.
Yeah.
because you could fail
Yeah.
over and over and over and not get
Right.
anything out of it. But if you fail and you stop and think, hey, what didn't go right this time? How could I do something better next time? How can I
Yeah.
learn from this and take it forward? Because
Yeah.
I think, Carol, you mentioned the idea of like a tipping point, right?
Yeah.
And so you could be going along and you just never know when that tipping point is going to come. Where like all the efforts of all the teachers, all the therapists, all the family members really come together. And you could just be the spark, right? That
Yeah.
really unleashes that tipping point. And so I think we just have to continue to be reflective in our practice, work together, and, we can create more of those tipping points for our learners that,
Yeah.
tip them into learning, basically.
Yeah, I think the failure thing, as you guys are talking, I obviously agree with everything. The other thing that needs to be said about failure is that the system, certainly here in the UK at the moment, works against success for a lot of students who've got additional needs. So
Yes.
they experience failure day in, day out, and then again at home with homework, which they can't read, they can't do. And that, when I work with these students and talk to them, that has such a huge effect on their mental well-being. So our systems, I mean, if I ruled the world, which I don't, obviously yet,
Yeah.
but if I could change the Department of Education in this country and in other ones, it would be to be more UDL, more all-encompassing, so that children don't fit, that feel currently they don't fit, have a place and have a place to learn and show what they can do. Because you know what? If you fail all the time, that is not great,
Yeah.
and
That's
that's
horrible.
happening
Like,
to some
feels bad.
children.
I think that, like, there's so many pieces in this, but when we talk about like bureaucratically driven systems, and educational systems are bureaucratically driven systems, while those systems are made up of human beings, the bureaucracy, the system itself, wants to perpetuate its own success, right?
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
where we get this idea of like failure's not okay. And then you put in on top of that, for educators, that education is it's a performance as much as it is a craft, as much as it is a science, right? When I'm standing up in front of 35 students, 40 students, or if I'm standing up in front of 10 students, it doesn't really matter. I have to there's this common misconception that I have to have the answers and I cannot be wrong and I cannot apologize. I have to do everything perfectly. And we perpetuate that over and over again with evaluation systems that are punitive, with all of these different things, which is the system saying this is how we measure success, but it's really not. So when you say that we don't foster failure, we absolutely try to kill failure as a reflective tool in education. I think that you highlight that so well.
Yeah, agreed. And UDL definitely designs opportunities for everyone to succeed. And I know we're coming down at the end of time, but Carol, I want to ask you one last question that we've had conversations about over the years. This is a serious question. Are you ready? If you were to pick a food truck, which kind of food which kind of truck would you go to?
What kind of options are there? I haven't even seen these buggers. What options have I got?
So, friends, those of you who are listening, Carol has never been to a food truck, and she refers to them as food wagons, which is amazing.
Wagons with food.
Wagons
I
with
love it.
food.
I love it.
So, coming to Washington D.C. for the conference, DC has food trucks everywhere. So, the question would be, what's your favorite food once you get to a food truck?
Well, what kind of, can you get anything at a wagon?
You can
Let's
get
say
anything.
you can. Anything you want.
Something with fish.
Something with fish. Okay,
Okay,
that's good to
perfect.
know. What about you,
Yeah.
Brian? Do you like food trucks?
I have a love-hate with food trucks, because I haven't found my perfect one. But if I were to create the perfect food truck for me, I would create a cereal food truck. one where you could get any flavor of
Really?
cereal you want with whatever milk or liquid you wanted to add in whatever size. And I think it's the ultimate UDL food truck, right? Because you can mix and match your different types of cereal. You can, if you want chocolate milk with your honey grams, you can, or if you want, goat milk or oat
That's
milk
brilliant.
with your Cheerios, you can do that too. That's what I would create.
My favorite food truck of all time is a churro food truck. 31 flavors of churros.
Oh,
No,
I'm there.
that's what I'm saying.
I'll do that one.
Right? That's what I'm
I'll
saying.
do that one.
Yeah, there's also there's a pie truck in DC.
Oh,
Yes.
I'll do that one.
That's got my name written all over it.
Okay. Carol, again, this has been a wonderful conversation. We're so grateful to have you. We cannot wait to see you in person. I know I've said that more than once. So thanks for joining us. If anyone needs to find you and follow your work, where can they find you at?
Oh, you see, I hide. I deliberately, I've spent my whole life being under the radar. So no websites, no nothing. You can contact me on LinkedIn. I'm there. I look about once a week,
Sounds
so
great.
that's probably the best place. But really, what I'd say is come to the conference. I'll be anywhere there's coffee and come and chat. That's what I would love. That's what I would love the most.
Love it. We're going to make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Coffee
Okay.
with Carol. That's going to be done.
Coffee with Carol. That's right. Okay, Carol, thank you so much. And we will see you soon, my friend.
Make sure you make it to UDL-Con. It's still open for registration, July 22nd and 23rd. And as always, y'all, peace, love, and belly rubs.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Learning Experience Podcast. We are so glad you're a part of this conversation.
And if you're like me and today's episode sparked some ideas or got your brain flowing, well, just remember, there's so much more to explore out there.
And remember that CAST is leading the way when it comes to accessibility, workforce innovation, professional development, and research.
So visit cast.org to dive deeper. That's CAST.org and keep learning with us.